There's an interesting controversy happening in the Archdiocese of New York. Cardinal Timothy Dolan has been named the Grand Marshal of the St. Patrick's Day Parade, which has been going on for decades, I think even more than a century, in the New York City area, presently and for quite some time, continuing right in front of the St. Patrick's Cathedral, the Cathedral of the Archdiocese of New York on Fifth Avenue. After he accepted the position of Grand Marshal, another group was accepted into the parade called Out at NBC Universal. This is a group that is a gay group, obviously, of employees at NBC Universal located at Rockefeller Center. And so the controversy is people are calling for the Cardinal to step down from Grand Marshal because he will be the Grand Marshal of a parade that accepts people who accept behavior that is outside Catholic teaching. Well, a couple things need to be looked at. First of all, we have to understand that Cardinal Dolan is the Archbishop of New York, and so he is the ultimate authority in the Archdiocese of New York. Secondly, he is responsible for all the souls in the Archdiocese of New York, Catholic and non-Catholic, including those at Rockefeller Center. Thirdly, the Archdiocese of New York is one of three dioceses, and only one of three dioceses, in the New York City area, the other two being Brooklyn and Long Island, all of which encompass partially or completely parts of New York City. Looking at all of that, we understand that this is a parade that celebrates St. Patrick. That's unlike the one in Boston, which does happen on St. Patrick's Day, but actually March 17th in Boston, or the weekend before that, is actually Evacuation Day, the day celebrating the day the British left Boston during the Revolutionary War. And in fact, the parade itself celebrates war veterans. But in New York, it is all about St. Patrick. There are people that are calling for the Archbishop to step down from the role as Grand Marshal, and he has chosen not to. And so, like all arguments, you have positions, but you also have the underlying issue. So the positions are the Cardinal should step down, and the Cardinal says no. What are the issues? Well, when we look at the issues, we can see that, and we can see them very clearly in today's or Sunday's reading. The issues have to do with asking the question, what is God's will? And ultimately, God's will is the salvation of all. In that light, what is the greatest way to recognize and celebrate St. Patrick regardless of the date or time of year? And that is to do what he would want you to do, which is to seek holiness, and what he himself did. It also would be a great time to read the famous breastplate of St. Patrick. But when we look at that, we realize that ultimately everything that we do that is called to seek to do anything to celebrate one of the saints should always be rooted in holiness and seeking holiness. Now, what is it that is the Father's will? The Father's will is that all are saved. And the way all are saved is to be transformed in the wisdom of God. And that's clearly in so many parts of the Bible that our greatest treasure should always be seeking the wisdom of God. In our second reading, we see these words from St. Paul, who describe what was Christ's attitude. And as it says, he did not seek divinity, equality with God, something to be grasped at. Rather, he took upon himself the humble act of seeking to do the will of the Father. In the wisdom of God, he sought to do what ultimately would bring the will of God, which is the salvation of souls. And that is what each and every one of us are called to do. We see in another part of the New Testament from the letters of St. Paul, when we seek the wisdom of God, we experience a transformation in our whole way of looking at the world around us. And so that's one of the things that we're called, to have a complete transformation so that we can understand God's will and we can seek to do it in our pursuit of holiness and seeking others to do the same. We also can see that there is a passage in Romans 1, where people use it to condemn specifically homosexuality. But in fact, that's not completely what that passage is about. What it really is, Romans 1:20, is when you have a society that understands there is God but rejects God, then what happens is you have a complete moral collapse, and with that, the society eventually collapses. So seeking to do the will and seeking to do the moral will of God begins with seeking to do the wisdom, or seeking the wisdom of God, and allowing ourselves to be transformed. And that is called seeking holiness. If someone is watching a network TV show and there's someone being interviewed who has a PhD in who knows what, and the PhD in who knows what says it is important for this group or whatever group to march in the parade, well, that's still human wisdom, because he's speaking on behalf of the fact that he was educated at one of our local universities or one of the universities in the world. But if a housewife who's had nothing more than a high school education turns around and says, but isn't the point of honoring St. Patrick, whether you go to the parade or not, seeking to live a holy life and allowing the Lord to transform us to be people of prayer and people who are united with the Lord and are transformed by the Lord? That is a form of divine wisdom that the Lord seeks us to embrace and allow ourselves to be transformed. Whether you go to the parade or not, whoever the Grand Marshal of the parade is, whoever marches in the parade, the most important thing is if you're going to honor St. Patrick, then you're going to seek holiness, and you're going to seek the wisdom of God and allow that wisdom to transform you. And when that wisdom transform you, we seek what St. Paul talks about in the second reading, the virtue of humility, rejecting all the vices, including the vice of pride, which, like humility, which is the mother of all virtues, pride is the mother of all vices. And when we look at all that, we say, let us seek whatever it is that God is seeking for us in our lives. Let us be transformed by him, and let us seek the holiness that he wants for us, which is everything that St. Patrick would seek. And despite the fact it is not March 17th, may I invite all people to look on the internet for what is known as the breastplate of St. Patrick and read it and pray it, because that's ultimately the greatest way to honor St. Patrick. God bless you. We're at 471. Let's give it a try again. Are we ready?